My name is Madison Kelly. I'm 32 years old, and for 14 years I carried a question that nobody wanted me to ask. Everyone told me to move on, to stop obsessing, to focus on being a good mother instead of chasing ghosts from the past. But here's the thing. Some questions don't just go away because people are uncomfortable with them. Some questions grow roots. They wrap around your ribs and squeeze every time you try to pretend everything's fine. And when the answer finally comes, it changes everything. So before I dive into this, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know I'm not alone in this. You're probably wondering how someone can refuse a paternity test for over a decade and still act like they're the reasonable one. Well, let me take you back to where it all started. Back when I was 18, scared, and convinced that asking for the truth made me the villain. My ex, his name was Derek, had this way of making me feel like I was crazy for even questioning him. He'd smile, shake his head, and tell me I was being dramatic. And somehow, I believed him. Somehow, I spent years apologizing for wanting clarity about my own child's life. What I didn't know back then was that silence could be a strategy, that refusal could be a form of control, and that the moment I stopped begging for answers and started building my own life, everything would shift. Because 14 years later, evidence surfaced that I never went looking for, and when it did, Derek's calm, collected mask shattered. If you've ever been silenced for asking the right questions, keep watching. This story is for you. I spent 14 years asking one simple question, and every single time I was treated like I was the one causing problems. People didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to deal with the uncomfortable reality that maybe, just maybe, I had a right to know the truth about my daughter's paternity. Instead, they told me to let it go, to stop living in the past, to focus on being a mother instead of stirring up drama. But here's what nobody understood. I wasn't asking out of spite or revenge. I was asking because I needed to know if the foundation my entire life was built on was real, or just another lie I'd been told to accept. If this story is already hitting close to home, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and drop a like, because what I'm about to share gets even more intense, and you're going to want to see how this unfolds. The truth is, when you're young and scared, you'll believe almost anything someone confident tells you. And Derek was confident. He had this way of looking at me like I was fragile, like I needed protection from my own thoughts. When I first brought up the paternity test, he didn't get angry. He just laughed. He said, "Madison, come on. You really think I'd lie to you about something like this?" And in that moment, I felt so small, so foolish for even asking. I apologized. I actually apologized for questioning him. But that question never left. It sat in the back of my mind during every birthday party, every school event, every time I looked at my daughter Emily and tried to piece together where she got her eyes, her laugh, her stubborn streak. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting my insecurities poison something that should have been simple. But deep down, I knew. I knew something wasn't right. And the worst part? Everyone around me acted like my intuition was the problem, not his refusal to prove me wrong. That's when I started to realize, sometimes people don't want the truth because it's easier to keep you doubting yourself. I was 19 when Emily was born, barely out of high school, living in a tiny apartment that smelled like mildew and cheap carpet cleaner. Derek and I had been together for 2 years, and I genuinely believed we were building something real. He was 23, had a steady job at a construction company, and he talked about our future like it was already written in stone. When I got pregnant, he didn't run, he stayed, and everyone praised him for that, like staying was some heroic act instead of basic decency. But looking back now, I realized that staying gave him something too. It gave him control. From the moment Emily arrived, I was drowning in responsibilities. I was the one waking up every 2 hours, changing diapers, figuring out why she wouldn't stop crying. Derek helped sometimes, sure, but he always had an escape route. Work ran late, his friends needed him, he was too tired. Meanwhile, I was expected to be grateful that he was even there at all. And whenever I brought up my doubts, whenever I hinted that maybe we should just do a paternity test to clear the air, he'd flip it around. He'd say, "Why are you punishing me for being a good father? Why can't you just trust me?" And just like that, I was the bad guy again. The conflict wasn't just between Derek and me. It was between me and everyone else who had opinions about my life. My mom thought I was being ungrateful. My friends said I was sabotaging a good thing. Even Derek's family treated me like I was the unstable one, the girl who couldn't appreciate what she had. So I did what everyone wanted. I stayed quiet. I played the role of the devoted girlfriend, the loving mother, the woman who had it all figured out. But inside, I was suffocating under the weight of unanswered questions. And the longer I stayed silent, the more power Derek had over the narrative of our lives. The first time I seriously asked Derek for a paternity test, Emily was 6 months old. We were sitting in our living room, and she was asleep in her bassinet, her tiny chest rising and falling with perfect rhythm. I had been working up the courage for weeks, rehearsing the words in my head, trying to find a way to say it that wouldn't make me sound accusatory. But there's no gentle way to ask someone to prove they're telling the truth, so I just said it. Derek, I think we should do a paternity test, just to be sure, just so there's no doubt. I tried to keep my voice steady, calm, reasonable. Before I tell you what happened next, make sure you're subscribed, because this is where things start to spiral in ways I never expected. Hit that like button if you've ever felt dismissed when you were just trying to protect yourself. Derek didn't yell. He didn't slam doors or storm out. Instead, he laughed. It was this light, almost playful laugh, like I'd just told him the most ridiculous joke he'd ever heard. Madison? Seriously? You're really doing this? He shook his head, leaning back on the couch with his arms crossed. I've been here every single day. I've changed her diapers. I've fed her. I've gotten up in the middle of the night. And this is what I get? Accusations? I tried to explain that it wasn't an accusation, that it was just about having clarity, about removing any lingering doubt. But he wouldn't hear it. He turned the whole thing into a referendum on my character. He said I was insecure, that I was letting my jealousy ruin something good, that I was looking for problems where there weren't any. And the worst part? I believed him. I apologized again, told him I was just stressed, that pregnancy hormones were probably still messing with my head. He accepted my apology with a patronizing smile, like I was a child who'd just learned a lesson. That moment taught me something I didn't fully understand until years later. That silence can be used as a weapon, and Derek was a master at wielding it. A few months after that first refusal, I made the mistake of confiding in my best friend, Rachel. We were sitting at a coffee shop while Emily napped in her stroller, and I finally let it all spill out. The doubts, the refusal, the way Derek made me feel crazy for even asking. I thought Rachel would understand. I thought she'd tell me I had every right to want proof. Instead, she reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said, "Maddie, you have to let this go, for Emily's sake." She said it with so much concern in her eyes, like she was trying to save me from myself, like my need for truth was somehow more dangerous than living in uncertainty. That conversation became a template for every other one I tried to have. My mom told me I was obsessing over the past instead of appreciating the present. Derek's sister said I was being selfish, that I was going to destroy Emily's sense of family over my own paranoia. Even my coworkers, who barely knew the situation, would offer unsolicited advice about letting things be and not creating problems where none exist. It was like everyone had agreed on a script, and I was the only one who hadn't memorized my lines. Slowly, I stopped talking about it. Not because I stopped caring, but because I realized that every time I brought it up, I was the one who ended up feeling isolated. The worst part wasn't the disagreement. It was the loneliness. I started withdrawing from people because I couldn't stand the way they looked at me, like I was damaged or difficult. I threw myself into taking care of Emily, into working extra shifts at the retail job I hated, into keeping the apartment clean and making sure everything looked perfect on the outside. Because if I could just be good enough, maybe the doubt would fade. Maybe I'd wake up one day and genuinely believe that Derek was telling the truth. But no matter how hard I tried, the question never left. It just burrowed deeper, wrapping itself around every moment of happiness, whispering that none of it might be real. Years passed, and the pattern became almost predictable. Every so often, usually when I was feeling particularly strong or clear-headed, I'd bring it up again. Emily was 3, then 5, then 7. Each time, Derek's excuses evolved, but the refusal stayed exactly the same. When she was 3, he said it would confuse her if she ever found out we'd done a test. When she was 5, he said we couldn't afford it, even though I'd already researched the cost and offered to pay for it myself. When she was 7, he said it would hurt Emily's feelings if she ever discovered I'd doubted him. He was always one step ahead, always had a reason that sounded just reasonable enough to make me second-guess myself. But it wasn't just the refusals. It was the way he positioned himself as the calm, rational one while painting me as unstable. He'd sigh heavily whenever I brought it up, like I was exhausting him with my irrationality. He'd say things like, "I don't know why you keep doing this to yourself, Madison. I don't know why you can't just be happy." And then he'd go silent for days, not angry, just distant, making me feel the weight of his disappointment. It was a form of punishment, and it worked. I'd apologize, again and again, trying to repair the damage I'd supposedly caused by simply wanting the truth. I started doubting my own instincts more than I doubted his words. I'd look at Emily, her bright green eyes, her infectious laugh, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, and I'd tell myself that biology didn't even matter. She was mine. I loved her. That should have been enough. But late at night, when the house was quiet and Derek was asleep beside me, the questions would creep back in, and I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was losing my mind, or if I was the only sane person in a world that had collectively decided to gaslight me into silence. By the time Emily turned 9, I had become the cautionary tale in my own social circle. I could feel it in the way people talked to me, the way conversations would shift when I entered a room. At family gatherings, Derek's relatives would make pointed comments about letting go of the past and focusing on what really matters. My own mother once pulled me aside at Thanksgiving and said, "You know, Madison, sometimes the worst thing you can do is go looking for trouble. You have a good man who stuck by you. Maybe it's time you appreciated that." Her words felt like a slap, but I just nodded and swallowed the lump in my throat. If you've ever felt like the world turned you into the villain for asking legitimate questions, hit that subscribe button and drop a like, because what comes next shows exactly how wrong everyone was about me. The whispers got louder over time. I heard through mutual friends that people thought I was bitter, that I just wanted control or some kind of revenge for reasons no one could quite explain. Derek fed into this narrative perfectly. He never badmouthed me directly, but he had this subtle way of sighing when my name came up, of looking wounded whenever someone mentioned my issues. He played the long-suffering partner so convincingly that even I sometimes wondered if he was right about me. No one asked how it felt to live without certainty. No one wondered what it was like to look at your child every day and have this gnawing question mark in the back of your mind that you weren't allowed to address. Society had made its judgment, and I was the problem. Not the man who refused a simple test. Not the people who dismissed my concerns. Me. I realized something dark during that period. Women who demand truth are often punished far more harshly than men who withhold it. We're called crazy, obsessive, bitter. And eventually, if you hear it enough times, you start to wonder if maybe they're right. When Emily was 11, something inside me shifted. We were at one of her soccer games, and Derek was standing on the sidelines with some other parents, laughing and joking like he didn't have a care in the world. I watched him from the bleachers, watched how easily he inhabited the role of devoted father, how naturally people gravitated toward his warmth and confidence. And I realized something that nearly broke me and freed me at the same time. I was never going to get the answer by asking. He had too much invested in keeping me in this state of perpetual doubt. So I stopped asking, not because I gave up on the truth, but because I finally understood that begging someone for basic honesty was destroying what was left of my dignity. That day, sitting in those bleachers with the autumn sun warming my face and the sound of children's laughter echoing across the field, I made a decision. I would stop explaining myself. I would stop apologizing for wanting clarity. I would stop waiting for Derek or anyone else to validate my right to know. Silence became my way of taking power back, and it felt like the first full breath I'd taken in years. Derek noticed the change immediately, though he didn't quite know what to make of it. I stopped bringing up the paternity test. I stopped trying to convince him or defend myself to our friends and family. I became polite, cordial, functional, but emotionally I stepped back. I stopped needing his approval or his reassurance. And weirdly, that seemed to unsettle him more than any of my previous demands ever had. He'd sometimes probe, asking if everything was okay, trying to figure out what had changed. But I'd just smile and say, "Everything's fine," because I was done giving him access to my inner world. I was done letting him see how much his refusal had cost me. The next 2 years were transformative in ways I never expected. I enrolled in night classes at the community college, something I'd been putting off since Emily was born. I started with business administration courses, and for the first time in over a decade, I was doing something entirely for myself. Derek was confused by this sudden shift. He'd ask why I needed a degree, what I was trying to prove, but I wasn't trying to prove anything to him anymore. I was building a life that didn't require his permission or validation. Every essay I wrote, every exam I passed, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd forgotten existed. I also started therapy, which Derek mocked at first with comments like, "So now I'm the bad guy who made you need a shrink." But my therapist, Dr. Caroline Evans, helped me see patterns I'd been blind to for years. She never told me what to do about Derek or the paternity question. Instead, she asked me questions that forced me to confront how much of my life I'd spent apologizing for my own instincts. She helped me understand that healing doesn't need permission from anyone else, that I could rebuild my sense of self even while living in uncertainty. Those weekly sessions became sacred to me, an hour where my feelings were valid, where my questions weren't treated as character flaws, while Derek stayed exactly the same job, same routines, same friend group. I slowly became unrecognizable, even to myself. I got promoted at work after finishing my degree. I started running in the mornings, something that cleared my head and made me feel strong. I developed friendships with women from my classes who didn't know my history, who saw me as capable and intelligent rather than damaged or difficult. Emily noticed the change too. She was 13 now, perceptive and thoughtful. And one evening she said, "Mom, you seem happier lately." I realized she was right. I had stopped waiting for my life to start and had simply started living it. Everything changed on a random Tuesday afternoon in October, 3 months after Emily's 14th birthday. I was at work, finishing up some paperwork in my office. I'd become a regional manager by then, when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. At first I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something made me open it. The message was brief. "I think you need to see this. I'm sorry it took so long." Attached was a PDF document, and my hands started shaking before I even opened it. If you're wondering what could possibly surface after all these years, make sure you're subscribed because this twist is something I never saw coming. Drop a like if you're as shocked as I was. The document was a medical record from a private lab, dated from when I was pregnant with Emily. It showed that Derek had actually gotten a paternity test done, without my knowledge, shortly before Emily was born. My eyes blurred as I read the results section. The test confirmed he was Emily's biological father. But here's what made my blood run cold. There were notes attached from someone named Jennifer Caldwell, who'd been a lab technician at the time, and was now coming forward because of a guilty conscience. Jennifer's statement explained that Derek had paid her extra to keep the results confidential, even from me. He'd wanted to know the truth for himself, but had deliberately kept me in the dark for 14 years, using my uncertainty as a form of control. She included email exchanges, receipts, everything. As I sat there in my office, the world tilted on its axis. He'd known all along, every refusal, every time he made me feel crazy for asking, every moment he positioned himself as the wounded party. He'd been lying, not about paternity, but about something worse. He'd weaponized my need for truth, had watched me suffer and doubt myself for over a decade, all while holding the answer I'd been begging for. I didn't confront Derek immediately. I needed time to process what I'd discovered, to let the full weight of his betrayal settle into my bones. For 3 days I went through the motions, made dinner, helped Emily with homework, smiled when necessary, all while carrying this explosive secret. Derek had no idea that his carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. He was still playing the role of the patient, long-suffering partner, still acting like my past doubts were some quirky character flaw he'd learned to tolerate. But I could see him differently now. Every smile felt like a mask. Every kind gesture felt calculated. On Friday evening, after Emily went to her friend's house for a sleepover, I finally showed him the documents. I didn't yell or cry. I simply placed the printed pages on the kitchen table while he was drinking his coffee and said, "I know what you did." The change in his face was instant and terrible. The color drained from his cheeks. His hand froze mid-air with the coffee cup. For the first time in 14 years, Derek looked genuinely afraid. He tried to laugh it off at first, that same dismissive chuckle he'd used so many times before. But when he saw I wasn't backing down, when he realized the evidence was irrefutable, his whole demeanor shifted. He started talking fast, words tumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. "Madison, listen. I can explain. I did it to protect us. I knew I was her father, and I didn't want you to—" But I cut him off. "You didn't want me to what? Have peace of mind? You watched me beg for 14 years. You made me feel insane. You turned everyone against me. And you knew the whole time." His panic was palpable now. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. For the first time in our entire relationship, Derek had no power over me. The story was no longer his to control, and he was absolutely terrified. The weeks that followed were surreal. Derek tried everything to minimize what he'd done. He claimed he was protecting Emily from unnecessary stress, that he was saving our relationship from my obsession. He even tried to make himself the victim, saying he'd been traumatized by my constant questioning and had made a mistake out of desperation. But his explanations sounded hollow now, transparent in their manipulation. I watched him cycle through denial, anger, bargaining, all while maintaining an eerie calm myself. I had spent so many years imagining this moment, thinking I'd explode with rage. Instead, I felt oddly peaceful. I didn't confront him with anger or demands for apologies. I didn't scream or throw things or give him the dramatic reaction he might have expected. I simply stopped needing his validation entirely. I filed for separation and consulted with a lawyer about my options. I told Emily the truth, age-appropriately, with the help of Dr. Evans, explaining that her father had made choices that hurt our family's foundation of trust. Emily was angry, confused, hurt, but she also saw me standing firm for the first time, not apologizing for protecting myself, and I think that mattered. That silence, that refusal to engage with Derek's attempts to rewrite history or manipulate the situation, hit harder than any accusation ever could. He'd call, text, show up at my workplace trying to talk things through, but I had nothing left to say to him. The power dynamic that had defined our relationship for 14 years had completely inverted. He was the one chasing answers now. He was the one feeling dismissed and unheard. And while I took no pleasure in his pain, I also felt no obligation to make him comfortable. For the first time since I was 18 years old, I was living on my own terms. 3 months after the separation, I was driving home from work on a cold December evening when everything finally caught up with me. Emily was at her debate club meeting, and I had the rare luxury of an empty house waiting for me. I pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and just sat there in the silence. And then, without warning, I started crying. Not the quiet, controlled tears I'd shed in therapy sessions or late at night when Emily was asleep. These were deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere I'd been keeping locked away for 14 years. But here's the thing. I wasn't crying from pain or heartbreak. I was crying from relief. It was like my body finally felt safe enough to release all the tension it had been holding, all the years of second-guessing myself, all the moments I'd wondered if I was losing my mind. The truth hadn't exploded my life the way I'd feared it might. Instead, it had settled, like dust after a storm, revealing solid ground beneath my feet. I cried for the 19-year-old girl who'd apologized for asking reasonable questions. I cried for all the years I'd spent believing other people's version of reality instead of trusting my own instincts. When the tears finally stopped, I felt lighter than I had in over a decade. I walked into my house, because Derek had moved out, and looked around at the life I'd built despite everything. Emily's soccer trophies on the shelf, my college degree framed on the wall, photos of us laughing, genuinely happy. 14 years of doubt had collapsed in one clear moment, but what remained wasn't rubble. It was foundation. Real, solid foundation built on truth instead of convenient lies. I made myself tea, curled up on the couch, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt completely at peace with who I was. In the months that followed, I began to understand that the paternity test had never really been just about biology. Yes, I'd wanted to know if Derek was Emily's father, and now I knew he was. But what I'd actually been fighting for all those years was something much deeper: dignity, trust, and the fundamental right to be believed. I'd been asking Derek to respect me enough to answer a simple question, and his refusal had been a daily reminder that my peace of mind meant nothing to him. The test results themselves almost didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd been right to ask, right to trust my instincts, right to demand transparency. Dr. Evans helped me work through this realization in therapy. She pointed out that I'd spent my entire adult life defining myself in relation to Derek's approval or disapproval. When he validated me, I felt worthy. When he dismissed me, I felt crazy. But now, for the first time, I was learning to validate myself. I was learning that my truth didn't require consensus, that I could trust my own perceptions even when everyone around me disagreed. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Some days I felt invincible. Other days I felt like a newborn learning to walk. But every day I was becoming more authentically myself. Emily noticed the change too. She was 14 now, old enough to understand complexity, and one evening while we were making dinner together, she said, "Mom, I'm proud of you. I know this whole thing with Dad has been hard, but you seem, I don't know, stronger somehow." I paused, knife in hand, and looked at my daughter, this incredible person I'd raised despite everything. "I finally believe myself," I told her. "That's all it is." I stopped waiting for permission to trust my own instincts. She hugged me then, and I realized that maybe, just maybe, I'd taught her something important about standing in your truth even when the whole world tells you you're wrong. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown, no public apology from Derek, no moment where everyone who doubted me lined up to say they were wrong. Real life doesn't work that way. Derek eventually accepted the separation, and we worked out a custody arrangement that prioritized Emily's well-being. Some of our mutual friends quietly reached out to apologize once they learned the full story. Others simply faded away, uncomfortable with the fact that they'd been wrong about me for so long. My mother never explicitly said she was sorry, but she started calling more often, asking how I was doing, listening instead of lecturing. The victory wasn't loud or public. It was quiet, personal, and deeply mine. It showed up in small moments. The way I could look at myself in the mirror without shame. The way I made decisions without needing external validation. The way I slept through the night without that gnawing anxiety in my chest. I started dating again, cautiously, and discovered that I'd developed an entirely new relationship with trust. I wasn't naive anymore, but I wasn't bitter either. I'd simply learned to honor my instincts and to walk away from people who made me question my sanity. Emily thrived too, in ways that surprised me. She'd been worried the separation would destroy our family, but instead, it seemed to free all of us from a toxic dynamic we'd been trapped in. She had honest relationships with both her parents now, me without the constant undercurrent of doubt, and Derek learning to be accountable for the first time in his life. Some victories don't need witnesses to be real. Some transformations happen in the quiet spaces between what was and what will be. And standing in my kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday, making breakfast for my daughter and planning my day, I realized I'd finally won something I'd been fighting for since I was 18 years old, the right to trust myself. So here we are, at the end of a story that took 14 years to unfold and only 40 minutes to tell. If you've made it this far, I want you to know something. If you've ever been silenced for asking the right questions, this story is for you. If you've ever been called crazy for trusting your instincts, if you've ever been made to feel like your need for truth was somehow a character flaw, I see you. You're not alone, and you're not wrong for wanting clarity, for demanding honesty, for refusing to live in someone else's version of reality. After hearing my story, I want to know, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stopped asking sooner, or would you have pushed harder? Do you think I should have confronted Derek the moment I got that evidence, or was waiting the right move? Leave your thoughts in the comments because I genuinely want to hear your perspective. And here's a bigger question. Do you believe that some forms of honesty are more important than peace? That sometimes you have to disrupt everything to find solid ground? I've wrestled with that question for years, and I'm still not sure I have a perfect answer. If you want more stories like this, stories about finding strength in impossible situations, about choosing yourself even when it costs you everything, about the messy, complicated truth of real human relationships, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll be back next week with another story that I think will hit you just as hard. This one involves a family inheritance, a hidden will, and a sister who thought she could rewrite history. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for making me feel less alone in all of this. Until next time.